Hello, I'm Jean-Philippe Courtois. Welcome to another edition of Positive Leadership, the podcast that helps you grow as an individual, a leader, and ultimately as a global citizen. My guest today, Dr. Caroline Leaf, is a renowned cognitive neuroscientist whose groundbreaking research into the intricacies of the brain and how our thoughts impact our well-being has reshaped our understanding of the human mind and mind management. Positive leadership starts with personal development. And Dr. Leaf's teachings on self-awareness and self-improvement can help all of us grow and develop the skills and qualities necessary for successful leadership. It's such an enormous pleasure to have you on the podcast, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Jean-Philippe. It's wonderful to be with you.
So, Caroline, if you don't mind, let's start with your roots. You are born in Zimbabwe, and I think you lived your childhood in South Africa. So can you tell us about your those early years and the values that you learned and that were shaped into you by your parents, and the way you navigated as well transition to the post-apartheid period at the time?
That's a great question. It was a very rich upbringing, and I literally grew up in the apartheid era, and so we were very, very aware as a family and got quite involved. And by the time I was at university, I was very, very keen to start having an influence and a change. So a lot of my early work in South Africa was done through the pre-transition and the post-apartheid era. I did a lot of work in the schools, the education system. I trained a lot of physicians. I worked with a lot of people that had suffered dramatically from what had happened from not only a emotional point of view, mental health, but also from an academic point of view. So I would go into what we would call the township areas, and where they were very abused and so on. And I would go in there and I would go and work with thousands of people at a time, helping them to understand how to manage and process their mental health and how to learn. So I did a lot of work in schools. The schools, the education system was really bad. And so I helped to train teachers to be able to deliver knowledge more effectively. And it was a very enriching time because I'd spend 3 days a week in the most dangerous areas that no white person could go into. And I could go in there, drive in there unharmed and go anywhere because people realized I was coming with a message of hope. It was one of the most enriching times of my life, and I can tell you a few stories that really shaped why I do what I do now.
Please.
And the one was I was actually in one of these environments where I was going to go and work with a whole group of teachers at a school. So the objective was to help teachers, to help students to deal with the emotional trauma, but also to help them improve the academic side of things. And normally there were a couple of hundred people there. This particular day, there were thousands. They were like down there, because by that stage people got to know me. And as we parked and walked through, there was like the Red Sea parted, and it was unreal because following me, I didn't realize why there was such a reaction. But following me, there was one of the most notorious gang leaders, and someone that people just avoided, and no one knew what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going on. I walked into the room, and I started just teaching and doing my thing. But as I walked in, this gentleman walked to the back of the room and stared at me, and I thought, oh my gosh, okay, I'm just going to do what I do. But I hope I'm going to get an escort out of here because this is pretty dangerous. As it turned out, 5 hours later, because I would work with these groups for up to 5 hours. We would talk for 5. They would go all day if I went all day. And towards the end of it, just one of the people had said to one of the teachers said, and leaders said, who would like to thank Dr. Leaf? And this young man, this gangster, this lead, that everyone was terrified of, there were tears pouring out of his eyes. Really? He ran to the front of the room. He held up his pen. He stood next to me and put his arm around me, and he said, now I know what to do with my pen and what to do with my life. Wow. And from there, he transformed. Apparently, he was a major drug leader. He was involved in everything that you shouldn't be involved in. He transformed his life, became a leader in the community, started back to school, got educated, supported it. It just was transformational what he did. Wow. And it was thousands of stories like that. They encouraged me to realize that no matter what you've been through, it's going to you can get through it, you can change, you can transform. Now, I couldn't go and fix the politics.
No,
I couldn't go and feed the starving, but what I could do is go and equip people with the understanding of, this is how my mind works, this is the impact of life, this is what I can do to help myself get to a point, this is how I can educate myself. And so that's what I spent 25 years doing, and doing research, and that was in South Africa. I'm 40 years into this field now, but that really, Jean-Philippe, that really got me going, and with this whole what I do.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and I'm sure you have many more to share. And I've been lucky to go to your beautiful country in South Africa many times in my life. Caroline, it's a wonderful country, society as well, so complex. And of course, you've been going through all that. I may ask you actually the question: are you still in touch with many people there? And given the scope of your work, is this something that you have the desire to go back to maybe one day?
So that's such a great question. So with my global platform, I have a lot of influence still back in South Africa, but I was very involved all through my career, working in the education system, working with physicians, I was on national TV there. So I dedicated my career there to supporting. And when I expanded to the States, it didn't change. They're part of my community still. Yeah. So we actually go back once a year. We're going back now just in May and I'll do three or four conferences there. In to see family. So I don't know if I will ever move back there again, but I do go back, and it's obviously it's in my heart, and that's where my roots are, and that's where my initial research began. So it's a big part of me.
Makes a lot of sense. Any particular memories as well you have, Caroline, of your parents, dad, mom, sometimes grandparents, that kind of shape some of your values early on, and particularly related to your mind, basically, in the way your mind is working and the way you wanted to master it one day?
Well, they were fantastic at encouraging. I'm one of 4 children, encouraging us to really pursue our dreams. And when I showed the direction that I was going to become a neurosurgeon, and got into med school and did part med school, but then I realized I don't want to just cut up brains. I actually wanted to understand the mind. So I got into another degree that enabled me to do that. But my parents were very encouraging. So from the beginning, they always, it was just a lot of support they saw the direction going in, and they really opened that door. And there was a lot of open discussion about what was going on. So we were a deep thinking family, and that challenged me. And I'm very grateful for that they opened my mind and really saw the need for me to move and pursue the direction I was going in. Very, very supportive.
Super exciting to see the family supporting you early on. It's not always the case. I know with some vacation calling, some people have to sometimes, move away from their family to accomplish the meanings of their lives. So I think you started your research back in the 80s, working with patients suffering from brain injury and trauma, when it was not yet acknowledged that the mind could alter the brain, and the idea of neuroplasticity was still fairly new at the time. But you quickly came to realization that you wanted to do things differently and to work with patients in a more optimistic and positive framework. And I think one of your early patients was in a coma following an accident, and he decided to do something that was actually not part of the traditional playbook, if I understand. So what did you do and what happened? Can you tell us that story?
Absolutely. So this was in my first year at university, when I went into a degree that actually combined medicine, psychology, communication, pathology, and linguistics and neuroscience. And it was a test. We were a test group. And I say that to just give you the foundation of why I did what I did. Was there was 1,000 people that applied. Only 60 of us ever qualified in this degree, and they stopped the degree because they basically put a 7-year degree into 4 years. So we worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And at the point when I was doing it, I thought, I will tell everyone never to do this. But I'm so glad I did it, because it opened my mind and it gave me the courage to do the research I've done, and helped me see things in a very different way. And one of the lecturers was a neurology lecturer. And as you say, neuroscience was in its birth stages at that stage. We didn't know much about neuroscience. It was very new. So it was much more from a neurological perspective. And our neurology / neuroscience lecturer was telling us about how with people with brain injury, the brain can't change. And in the 80s, that was the philosophy. Up until the 90s, between about the 50s and the 80s, the belief was that the mind was separate from the brain, but that the brain could change. And once the brain was damaged, that's it. So we were having this lecture, and I put my hand up, and I'll never forget this. I put my hand up and I said, "Sir, but how does that happen? How can your brain not change? Because your mind is the thing that's always changing. We're never the same moment to moment. And your mind is using your brain. I mean, you've just said that in the lecture. And so therefore the brain's got to be able to change." And he was quite, 80s, woman, science. He was challenged. And he quite facetiously said, "Oh, well, then go and do research." So I said, "Okay, well, what area?" And he said, "Well, go and do it in closed head injury, which is traumatic brain injury."
Yes.
And I said, "Absolutely." And he was basically, it was a negative challenge. It was because he was at that stage, there was very little research on traumatic brain injury, and the belief was that once your brain was damaged, that's it. So long story short, I actually, innocent student, didn't quite pick up I picked up the challenge, and I thought, well, let me go prove this. And I started working with traumatic brain injury and work with people, believing that the mind could change the brain. So I thought, if we can learn to stimulate the mind in a very organized and directed way, we've got to the mind is using the brain. The brain can't do anything on its own, so therefore the brain's going to respond. So that was my philosophy, and I developed a system, and I started testing it out and doing research. And one of my patients was a patient that had been in a coma for quite a few weeks. Her and her brother had a terrible car accident. They'd been thrown very far from the car. Her brain damage was very, very bad. And her parents had been told by the neurologists that basically she'd be a vegetable. Now, thank goodness they don't say that to the patients' faces anymore, but that was very often the comment that people would, they didn't want to get the parents' hopes up, which is terrible because hope is a huge part of healing. Anyway, so the parents they ignored that, they didn't give up, and for the first few weeks that she was in hospital, they kept stimulating her. They had people around 24/7. They then just fast forward, they contacted me about a year after her accident. She came out of her coma, which was a miracle. They didn't believe that it would happen. And she started talking and walking again. She was 16 at the time of her accident. So by this time, she was about 17. The parents contacted me when she was 17. She was a very average student before the accident. And at this stage, after her accident, at the age 17, she'd come out of her coma, total miracle. But she was battling to even function at a second grade level. So like a sort of 8-year-old level.
Yes.
And so the parents said, "Will you work with her?" And at this stage, my research was totally experimental. And I said, "Look, I can't guarantee anything. It's experimental.
Of course.
You can try it." So long story short, they worked with me 3 days a week, 8 hours a week. And within 8 months, not only had she caught up with her peer group, which were now in her last year of school, but she actually went ahead of her peer group. She finished school with her peer group. She got better grades than what she did, or her marks, her scores and so on her tests were better than before the accident without brain damage. So she in an 8-month period, she went from a second grade to finishing 12th grade, going on to get a degree, went on to change her life. It's a miracle. When I took her back to the neurologists and the team, they said, "You were lucky." I said, "There's no ways that this is luck. This was utter, pure hard work that this person put in. They used their mind to change their brain." And we saw that at that stage, you didn't have an MRI. We hadn't had MRI, so we would use a CT scan. So we could see the change in the brain and her behavior. And
that's an incredible story, Caroline. Is it what actually triggered deep down into you the calling to do what you do today and what you've done? Because you said at the time you are doing some early research, early days, so you are not necessarily sure about your practice, nor did you define neurocycle steps, I guess, that we'll get to in a few minutes. So was it the key event that actually drove you to do more? Yeah.
Definitely. It was a key event because through my 4 years at university, we were very trained in all the clinical side and everything. And I started that research early on. I did some other projects at university that also triggered it, where I worked with children that had been very damaged from various different, brain damage as well, that sort of thing. And I saw major changes, so that it was birthed in my first degree. But then by the time I'd done my master's and PhD, I would say that particular incident was a huge stimulation. And then working in South Africa, seeing that if you just give people ability to use their mind, they changed. So yes, it did stimulate that. And the neurocycle was birthed back in that time period in the late 80s. And the work that I did then in the late 80s, early 90s was some of the first work in neuroplasticity in the world at the time, specifically in my field, showing that if you change your mind, you can change your brain. So yes, that definitely was a trigger.
Yeah. So I think it's not just people who have suffered brain injury or trauma that can use these techniques, isn't it? The skills you teach about mind management and reprogramming the brain can be used by everyone to help them respond to situations, to get basically a healthier mindset. So would you mind starting by sharing some of the basic definition? What's the difference, first, Caroline, between our mind and our brain that you talked about? Because for most people, it looks like the same thing, or it's quite ambiguous. And what do we call consciousness versus non-conscious and the subconscious? But let's start first with the mind and the brain.
Excellent questions. And yes, this is just everything. I'm so glad you mentioned this. Is even though I started in the world of working with people with traumatic brain injury and learning disabilities and trauma, I very quickly saw, hey, I need this for me. This is actually a life skill. So the application is therapeutic and it's life skill because it's mind, and that's where we can lead directly into the definition of mind versus brain. For years, there was the understanding. For thousands of years, philosophers understood that the mind and the brain were separate and there's some kind of connection. Then we had the Cartesian time and Descartes and all that sort of thing, where there was the separation was seen but not a connection. But that kind of, it's extremes. That's always like that. That's how we discover things. We go from one extreme to the next. But if you look at the actual science that we currently have in the 200 years or more or less of the modern sort of scientific age, what we see is a very clear picture between that there is a difference, but that the mind is actually embrained and embodied. And so what I mean by that is think of the physical brain and think of your physical body as very much the physical things. Now, the mind is physical, but it's a different type of physical. We're talking about electromagnetic waves. We're talking about quantum physics. We're talking about gravitational fields, but it exists. And what we know from modern science is that when someone is alive, like us now communicating, people watching, we are able to communicate and connect because of the mind. So your mind is like your life force. It makes your mental side work and it makes your physiological side work. So the fact that your heart's beating right now, the fact that your lungs are working, that is because you're alive with your mind. So your mind drives that neurophysiology, and it also drives the mental aspect of us being able to function. So the brain, if you dead, the brain just disintegrates, as does the body. And also we know that the mind puts life experiences, we with our mind is us. It's our ability to think, to feel, to choose, to respond, to process, to react. It's all of that. We're responding 24/7. During the day we respond to life and we actually wire that into the brain and the body. So it's not the brain that runs on memory. It's the brain and the body, and it's a feedback loop, but it's also in the mind. Now you've got a sky behind you and everyone can see it. So this is a great analogy you can use to explain mind-brain. So the mind you can see is the sky. It's these interlapping fields and energy fields. And then as the particles of water condense, you form clouds. And clouds constantly change. So this is a great analogy. The sky changes, the clouds change. The sky is your mind, the clouds are your thoughts. And your thoughts, like a cloud is made of lots of droplets of water, a thought is made of lots of bits of memory. And they're constantly changing because we're constantly changing. So that's a great analogy. So you could almost see each of us having our own sky with our own clouds in our mind, and then that is put into the brain as a physical structure and into the body as a physical structure. So the cloud has its own representation in the brain and the body, and then you connect it to everyone else's clouds. So that's skies. So that's one great way of visualizing it.
That's a wonderful analogy. I love it. And it seems to me that, again, the mind comes with this incredible blend of experiences that we've acquired as well during our lives. And then we have to go through the processing of the thoughts, because you talk about the thoughts. It makes me think about this famous quote that I'm sure you've heard so many times. We never know actually who said that. Watch your thoughts before they become your words. Watch your words before they become your action. Watch your action before they become the habits, and then all the way to your destiny. So
exactly,
is it kind of a way to think about the way the mind is working until it gets into the brain and neuroplasticity of the brain?
Absolutely, and the brain and the body. So that's a brilliant explanation, because this conversation, for example, is words that are coming out and visual streams of energy. So auditory sound waves, electromagnetic light waves, that's what our words, we perceiving it as words.
Yeah.
But the initial impact is actually those waves, and those waves of the sky processing it and then forming the clouds, and then the sky it takes the clouds and puts that into the brain, and it becomes there's a protein reaction, and you build like a tree-like structure in the brain. And then at exactly the same time, it doesn't happen separately, it's at the same time, you're actually building a little hedge, like in a garden-like structure in every cell of your body. So we have 37 to 100 trillion cells collectively in the brain and the body. And every experience we have all day long is moving from the sky clouds and into the brain as little trees, and into the cells of the bodies as little hedges. So like our heart cells and our lung cells and all have memory of this conversation, but it's from a slightly different perspective, and it all gets coordinated by the mind. So it's a little bit technical, but
no, I
think people can...
I love it. You know, recently, Carl, I had the opportunity to have a best-selling author, but also a Hindu priest, Dandapani, and a coach as a guest. And we had a fascinating discussion on awareness. He said, where awareness goes, energy flows. And we're just listening to your energy, actually, vibes going through our discussion right now. In his book, The Power of Unwavering Focus, he brings a very interesting analogy of a house with 3 floors, 3 levels, one for consciousness, and then he navigates with us in the house to open many doors with our awareness. And in his view, training and controlling your awareness is critical to your mental health. And actually, in your book, Changing Up Your Mental Mess, you introduce a very powerful practical approach that I love, actually. I've using it as well, starting to use some of that, the 5-step neurocycles. So first of all, what is your own definition of awareness, to go back to this awareness moment?
Fantastic. I love that question so much, and I'm familiar with his work as well. So basically, awareness is something that is very much spoken about in our current mindset and zeitgeist. Yep. And awareness is so awareness is if we just have awareness and we don't do something about awareness, we can actually have a problem. So if you open every door in the house and we start looking at it, but you don't actually manage what's in there, you'll create a tremendous chaos and get into worse mental health. So we have to understand how we use awareness. So the emphasis on awareness is very important, but it's also what do we do with what we're now aware of. So I've opened all these doors. Exactly. So awareness is there's a general awareness where we have a general awareness that I feel anxious or hovering anxiety or happy or whatever. Then there's a focused awareness that is the opening of the doors equivalent, where I see, okay, I'm aware of this, and you focus it. And so that is your consciousness, and that consciousness, we often talk about streams of consciousness, and in science we often talk about consciousness. Well, not me, I don't agree with this, but there's a statement made that a lot of people may have heard, that consciousness is the hard question of science. I disagree totally, because consciousness is the most obvious question, because the fact that you and I can even have this conversation and even talk about the fact that there's a stream of consciousness in houses and all these, that's obvious, that is our consciousness in operation. So maybe we need to expand the definition of awareness and consciousness and have a look at the fact that we are consciously awake now having this conversation, but we were asleep a few hours ago and we were in an unconscious state. So when you're asleep, you're in an unconscious state, but that doesn't mean your brain stops. It doesn't mean that your mind stops. Unconsciousness and consciousness are just different mind states. So your mind moves through different states, and then that affects how the brain functions. So unconsciousness is sleep, when you're under anesthesia, all that kind of thing, where your mind is still processing everything. That's why we dream. That's why people under anesthesia can hear or processing comments being made over them in surgery and that kind of thing. And then consciousness is when we're consciously awake. Then you get consciousness, unconsciousness when we're asleep or under anesthesia. But there's another level that people don't speak about, and that is called the non-conscious. And I know this is something that you're interested in too. Now, the non-conscious is this area that I've spent nearly 40 years researching. There's not many of us that actually research this area to this extent.
Why? Why is that?
I think it's a matter of definition. I
Uh-huh.
think people have got so caught up in the concept of the subconscious and the unconscious.
And unconscious.
They use those words
I see.
interchangeably. So subconscious and unconscious have been the messaging has been that there's programs in those that run
Yeah.
us, and we change the programs, and that's actually not correct. If you look at the science, we have our conscious mind, we have the subconscious, which is a bridge or a doorway or a waiting room. That is, it doesn't hold, it just basically is a temporary holding space.
Yeah.
And that the consciousness is limited. So if you think of it like a funnel, the consciousness is the top of the funnel. Then as the funnel starts widening,
Yeah.
that's the subconscious, like a waiting room. And then underneath, that funnel opens up into infinity. And that infinity is your non-conscious. Your non-conscious is the sky. The sky is infinite.
Yeah.
And it just goes on and on and on. And your non-conscious is your aliveness, your mind. It's this biggest part of you. It's where your wisdom resides. It's where the messiness of life resides. It's where all our experiences reside. And it's infinite in its connection with, it's there driving us. It's on our side. It's forever. It's the part of us that if someone comes to you and says, hey, Jean-Philippe, I've got this issue, and in running business issue, whatever, someone in Microsoft comes in, you listen and you process and you access wisdom. That is you consciously tapping into your non-conscious, taking all your experience and tapping into the deepest level of wisdom and then speaking it back to them. So all of us are literally, that's our core fundamental who we are. We made of this wise non-consciousness that is matches the neurobiology and the biology, where we actually, what we call as scientists call it wired for love. So the non-conscious never goes to sleep. It's infinite. It's beyond space and time. It operates at about 400 billion actions, or 10 to the 27, even faster. The conscious mind is slow. It only operates at 2,000 actions per second. So the conscious mind is limited. So and it's brilliant, but limited in how much it handles at once, because the conscious mind, coming back to awareness, is the part that does the awareness. So when we feel aware, when we focus on awareness, what we're doing in essence is, and we talk about opening the doors, we are actually directly making the deliberate intention to focus in onto the subconscious and find what is the non-conscious telling us. So that's at the door open. So it's something coming through. What wisdom? And the non-conscious, just very quickly, there's a messy part and there's a wise part. The wise part is the bulk. It is the core. It's the fundamental. The messiness is how we do life. We have to experiment back and forth, hypothesizing, etc. So it's that combination. Does that make sense? I don't know if
that makes sense. But there's so much to uncover, Caroline, because you've been diving into that space of the mind and the brain for so many years. So I'd like you to help us uncover, in a way, the 5 steps that you've defined. And the way you've, I guess, this is your attempt to help us navigate all the way from this unconsciousness, subconsciousness, and consciousness, all the 3 levels all together, and in a way make sense of our life, every second of our life, if we can. So help us understand the way you've been defining that cycle and the way it can work with all of us, actually.
Absolutely. Well, that's such a great question. So yes, and thank you for summarizing it so well. Yes, that's exactly. I'm trying to help people navigate and tap into their wisdom and so on. So that goes whether you've had extreme trauma, extreme brain damage, or you just want to live, or you're a combination of the above. So in other words, what the neurocycle does is help you to manage your mind for whatever you need, whether it's a day-to-day, in the moment struggle. Maybe you're in a meeting and someone throws you off in the meeting, or you get a text while you're whatever, or maybe you've developed a bad habit where you've got stuck in social media or just whatever, or you've had a trauma. So there's kind of, it covers all those categories, or there's some kind of neurological damage from a traumatic brain injury. All of that, it's your mind that does the work. So what we need to do as humans is tap into this wisdom and be very deliberate and intentional about that. And when you do that, you also activate resilience, which is a natural part of our functioning. We're not broken individuals. We actually pretty strong if we know how to tap into that, or very strong if we know how to tap into that strength. So what I wanted to try and help my patients initially do, and then just myself, and then people, now we reach millions on our platform, was to try and access, how do I consciously get into that state where I can open that door, to use the analogy you gave earlier on, and then also walk into that room, decide, okay, the stuff here is something I need to deal with, but I'm not I'm not ready now. So I'm going to be aware of it. I'm going to put a sign on the door that I'll come back to it. But I
Yep.
actually need to go to that door. That's what I need
This
to
one.
deal with first. And then you're going to go into that door and you're going to know, what do I do inside that room? All the stuff is now popping up all over the place. The analogy I have for the equivalent of the house is buildings, a building with lots of windows, and you're on the outside, so you're safe. And you can go up to the window and there's a mess there, and maybe you're ready to go in, maybe you're not, but you're always safe because you're on the outside. And maybe that window you're ready, so you go in and you start fixing. So that's kind of a similar analogy. But the neurocycle helps you, is the process that I've developed for how do I, from that patient you asked me about, from those work, is how do I get this awareness and take this awareness to a point where I can actually find what the awareness is telling me. So what is the thought? What's the cloud in the sky? And what's the cloud made of? And is that cloud a storm cloud? And do I need to let the storm run out so that the cloud can just change its structure? Because I can't ever get rid of a cloud. I don't know if any of your listeners and you are aware of this, but a cloud never goes. It transforms. So you never ever, no energy ever disappears. It's always transformed. So the neurocycle helps you to go in that room and to reconstruct, deconstruct and reconstruct. So that, yes, because whatever you've experienced, whatever your stories are in your life, if they've as they've become part of you, they never go away. But the good news is that you can change what they look like. So you can change the storm cloud, which looks like a toxic tree in the brain, a tree that's all ugly and roots, and in the body it will look like little broken hedges with thorns and just whatever analogy you want. You can't get rid of those, but you can transform them, and that's what the neurocycle is doing.
So can we start at the very start? What is the starting point, the launch pad, where we start step number one, Caroline? What does it look like, and what should our mind think about for this very first step?
Absolutely. So the very first step is to gather awareness, and in gathering, the word gather is very
gathering.
Very important. So you're gathering awareness. So we've spoken a bit about awareness. So you're gathering awareness, but gather implies that I'm actually controlling, because if I'm gathering something, I'm choosing what I want to gather. And that's very vital, that there's an element of autonomy and control. So I chose that word for a very specific reason. And just very quickly, all of these 5 steps I'm about to explain are based on years and years of research, and we still do research and publish in scientific journals. So what I've done is taken the complexity of how stuff gets in the brain, in the body, and mind, brain, body, and how to reverse engineer that. So this is the process we're describing. So it's a very complex process that I've simplified, because when I'm working with someone with a traumatic brain injury, with someone who's in trauma, or a young child of 2, or anyone, you don't want complex, you want simple. So there's complexity, but the application is very simple. So you're going to gather awareness, and what that looks like is saying to yourself, okay, how am I feeling? And ask yourself the question, and label 1 or 2, and it's time. You don't spend hours. It's done pretty quickly. That's really key. Because if we spend too long, then we get stuck in the emotions, we'll get caught up and create a storm. So the whole idea is to do the neurocycle very quickly, between 5 to 15 minutes. It'll probably stretch to a 15 if you're dealing with a big thing like a trauma. If it's a habit, you can do it in around 5 to 15. And also it's done daily in a planned and guided way over 63 days. And we can talk about why 63 days.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. Talking about the habits. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So the first step is gather awareness. You're going to gather awareness. I've got 4 fingers up of 4 different things. Your emotions. Emotions are these 4 things are called warning signals. Signals warn us. They're telling us something. Not necessarily bad. If there's something good, they'll also warn you, because if there's something good, like a great moment in your life, you want to focus on those, and you want to grow those into your mind-brain-body connection, which we call psychoneurobiology, because that increases resilience. So these 4 warning signals always work together. They're not symptoms of diseases. They are telling us how we're showing up. They're giving us an indication of what the cloud is made of. So the first one is emotions. The second one is behaviors. The third one is bodily sensations. And the fourth one is perspective. So when I gather awareness, step 1, I say to myself, what am I feeling in this moment? Maybe depression, anxiety, or maybe frustration and jealousy, or maybe just burnout, or whatever. So related to this, emotions never live alone. If in this emotion of, let's say it's depression, how am I, where am I feeling this in my body? Or body. Behavior. You can take behavior first. Maybe it's withdrawing, or maybe it's irritability. So, and then where do I feel this in my body? Maybe it's gut ache. mind-brain-body
Yep.
connection.
Yep.
And how is this influencing your perspective, how you're looking at life in the moment? Life sucks. So it's 4 simple questions, 4 simple statements that helps to zoom in and focus. I go in the room
Yeah.
and I now am identifying the bed, the chair, whatever.
Yeah.
Just
And
to
do you do that by writing it down, by basically with a few words to verbalize it, or do you just speak loudly to yourself? How do you do that to be
so you could
effective?
Okay, so if I was working with you as a
Yep.
patient or
Yep.
as a
Yep.
coach or something, you would be doing it out loud with me.
Yes.
And if you were doing, I have an app because we're building a whole mental health technology platform and we're expanding. So we've got this neurocycle in an
Yep.
app. There, obviously, I'm not with you, so you have the ability to be busy transforming that. Currently, the app you do this and you're basically just out loud. If you want to make a note in a little journal, you can.
Yep.
But the first 2 steps or
Yes.
where you just basically are talking
Basic.
out loud or talking
I
in
see.
your head, depending on what
Okay.
you feel. Out loud is great because
Okay.
that auditory stimulation makes you think
Yeah.
deeper. And then the way we're transforming the technology is that you'll be able to type it right into a screen immediately.
Okay.
But for now, you the way that the app works is you just basically out loud and
Out
speak it
loud.
out loud or
Yeah.
quiet it to yourself.
So step
And
number
then the-
one, sorry, Carol. Step
No,
number
no,
one,
go ahead.
we gather. And to me, gathering means, doesn't mean actually picking, selecting, because listening to you, sometimes you gather a lot of stuff in your mind, right? Too many things, which makes actually our minds messy. So
Exactly.
this is a step where you start picking and selecting, I guess, right? In this gathering.
It is because you're gathering 4 specific
The
things.
4
So
dimensions, that you talked about.
we're not all over the place.
Yeah.
We're going into 4 dimensions. There's very specifically, what am I feeling? Where is it in my body? How's it affecting my behavior? How's it affecting my perspective? So that
Clear.
and those 4 things are how we show up every moment of every day in our life.
Yeah.
They never work alone. We talk a lot about emotions in the general sort of media, but emotions don't live alone. They live with these other things. So you've got to bring them all together. And that helps you to zone in, like shining a flashlight.
Yep.
It's kind of like the analogy that I know that you like of mine of flying over the forest. And we're probably going to come to that. Okay, so then the next step is once you've gathered awareness, now what do I do with that? Now you go to reflecting. The key thing, Jean-Philippe, with working with the mind-brain-body connection, getting your networks to be reconstructed, is you have to be organized and you have to be systematic. And chaos is all over the place. So we are making things de-chaos. We're taking the chaos out of it. We're giving you control. And that changes all your neurophysiology. It changes how you expect things. So there's a psychological and a physiological thing that actually happens. So the next thing now is that I've gathered these 4 sentences. Now I'm going to reflect. Think of reflection. The word reflect itself is very powerful. If I shine a white light through a prism, it's going to come out in the colors of the rainbow. So this is what I want you to do. You're shining these 4 questions that you've gathered through very like a laser through the prism. What is it telling us? So this is a little bit about, why am I feeling this emotion? Why does this happen in my body all the time? Is this a pattern? So you're starting you're not getting all the answers yet because you limit this. It's a minute or 2 that you're spending on each, and that's very, very, very key.
But
to get into the non-conscious. You don't hover for hours on one thing.
Does it mean, Caroline, that it means that we have to do some interpretation at this stage? Is it? We start to interpret all the signals we get through our bodies or again, behaviors, emotions, so on. And then as we reflect, we kind of think through what it means for us, actually, and decide this is the key message I'm getting out of all of that right now.
Yes, you're starting. Reflection is starting to understand. It's a starting point. It's a little bit of a why. But now the key here is that you don't want to spend too long there because you want to follow the sequence because it's layer upon layer. It's like layers of an onion. If you try and solve everything in that reflect step, you're going to get lost. Okay. So there's a reason for all the timing of this as well. So but you're quite right. It's starting. Why do I feel this? Why is this in my body? Why am I showing up like this? What is this? Where's this coming from? So you're now getting into that curious state. Then what you do is something that's a very important step, and that's called the 3rd step, which is the right step. And this is, you don't journal, you don't make long-winded sentences. You simply pour like a mind storm. Whatever has been stimulated by the first 2 steps, you write down onto a piece of paper. And I've created a structure called a metacog, which grew out of the concept of mind mapping, but it was taken, I've done a lot of the science research to make it more compatible with this whole conscious mind, non-conscious. And you don't have to, but I strongly recommend, because it is a way of organizing information that mirrors the network of the psychoneurobiological network. In English, it mirrors how things get stored inside of our mind brain body connection. It's our mind isn't stuck in the linear now and time. Our mind is in fact our entire mind and body network is beyond space and time. So what we're trying to do is capture that, because when we can get beyond space and time, we can see stuff that we don't see before. And this was major. Like, I'd work with people with a lot of who had a schizophrenia diagnosis, and using this particular step of the metacog was phenomenal in helping people to see the disconnect, to see things. All my patients, it was one of the all of this is within the net. You don't do the writing on its own, but I can't stress enough how important it is not to try and journal things at this point, but to just put down, even if it feels unrelated, just dump on a piece of paper, a mind storm, just put it down all over the place. And I go into detail in the book and the app on how to do a metacog. So then you've gathered you've these 4 things. You've started the reflection. Now you're just going to dump it on. Now you've got this mess in front of you. So that takes you to the 4th step. And the 4th step I call the recheck. And now this is where we reconceptualize. This is now we say, okay, this is what's going on. What does this mean? What is this thought that's growing here? What am I actually dealing with? What are those signals attached to? This has happened. How can I see this in a different way? What's the pattern? What's the trigger? So there's a lot of that's what reconceptualizing it. So you're looking at what's come up, and now you're trying to make sense of it. You're getting the pattern, you're tidying it up, you're seeing connecting the dots. I have to stress, this doesn't happen in one day. This happens over time. So it's a little bit each day. That's where the key is. Then once you've done that, the rechecking step, you stop at a point, as I keep saying, time, and you take what you've gathered, reflected, written, and rechecked, and you create a statement. And that statement is something to carry you through today, not forever, today. What do I need to do today so that I don't let this detract me from what I've got to do for the rest of the day? That will boost me and help me to start taking me in the positive direction. And that's called an active reach.
Okay. Is it kind of an affirmative statement, Caroline, this active reach? Is it like a statement to myself, hey, JP, today, this is what you're going to do and the way you're going to do it?
Absolutely.
Is it a real deep intent we have for the day or for the moment on the way I want to really focus my energy, my mind, and the best in myself for that moment? Absolutely. That's what it is. And you're going to get, it's like a positive affirmation or a quote that you love or a little statement that you say to yourself. But the key thing here, Jean-Philippe, is that it comes at step 5. If you skip the other steps and just say a positive affirmation or set an intent for the day, that doesn't work. The science shows it does not work, and we know from our experience. So you can even use a technique like visualization. I often recommend to people, get a statement. Maybe you're working on something like battling with regret or battling with, if only I did this, and that's keeping you stuck and you can't move forward and progress in your work or whatever. And it could just be, remember to not if only today. Remember, and it could be that you visualize a cloud in the sky, or you visualize a rose. Or you visualize yourself succeeding. It's progressive. It will grow, but it grows out of those prior 4 steps. And it's a little statement with a little visualization that you say, quick, easy, nothing complicated. Super helpful, Caroline, and for sure, it's going to take all of us a lot of practice. So, tell us in a couple of minutes, if you can, the way we wire that, as a set of new habits. In order to practice. I think you mentioned before, obviously, it's going to take us 63 or 67 days. It's very precise because you've been researching that. So tell us why, and tell us also the connection between that kind of daily practice and the way we are maybe, basically helping out the neuroplasticity of our brain to get used to it in a different way. Absolutely. So very quickly, neuroplasticity applies to the body too. So our body and brain are plastic; they keep changing. So for example, every second you are making 800,000 to a million new cells, and the quality of those cells determine the quality of your body. So your mind is actually influencing the whole body. That's that connection. So with the neurocycle, you are
generating a very healthy energy through the brain and the body. And this is not something woo-woo. This is pure physics that you are sending through a way that it's same kind of electricity that makes your cell phone work. That you're controlling and directing that energy wave through the brain. So basically, you are. If you think of the brain and body as a physical structure, if you think of a house, you can't just there's and you want to rebuild your house. You've got to deconstruct that house and then rebuild that house. This is kind of what we're doing. We're deconstructing and reconstructing. So in essence, the neurocycle process, it's not going to take you one day to knock a house down and rebuild it. It's the same element. We know that if you have a surgery, you're going to get cut up to get healed, and it takes time. If you're going to do a sport, we know all of that. But when it comes to the mind, we want a quick fix. We don't like feeling bad. We want to just have a quick fix. It doesn't work like that. So there's not enough research in this area either. And this is why I've spent the last 40 years also working on the habit formation. We've actually got 2 papers coming out, one last year and another 3 coming out this year on research I've been doing recently. Basically, what we've seen is that to get those changes in the brain and the body, those hedges, the trees, the clouds, that takes daily guided practice over 63 days. There's a healing journey. So habits form somewhere between 63 and 67 days. I've taken 9 weeks as an average, and there's an up and down cycle. The first 3 weeks is a lot of hard work where you spend around 15 minutes a day, so more or less 3 minutes per each of those steps, and you basically are finding what those 4 signals are attached to, and you're finding the roots, and you're deconstructing and you're reconstructing, and that's quite a lot of work. Then this is where a lot of people stop, and that's why we have had this myth, and it is a total myth, that habits form in 21 days. It was in the 60s, a doctor, a surgeon, did some plastic surgery, and he saw his patients healing in cycles, which is what the body does. The body heals in cycles of 21 days. But what we found is that healing is not just, there's healing and then there's the stabilization of the healing. So in the first 21 days, you will deconstruct and form a new network. But that network is tiny. So if you think of a massive forest, and every experience of your life from when you're born to whatever age you're at now, that's a massive forest. You've got trillions of thought trees in that forest, and clouds in the sky, and hedges in your body, and they're constantly changing. So if you've just built and reconstructed a new thought through this process, it's this big, it's tiny. And so even though you feel amazing after 21 days, it's the danger zone, because there's this, I've got this. But if you stop, what we see, and I've done all the brain research and as well, that shows that you go through from 21 days, so 22 through 28, there's a little bit of a peaking, and then it drops. That drop needs to happen. There's a energy pattern change that helps to grow. It's like you're putting all the energy into the roots to grow the tree. And to grow that to be a big enough tree to actually, and I say tree, thought, that it actually impacts your behavior, it has to be transformed. It has to have energy added. So to become a habit, it has to grow. And so you go into phase 2, which is at least 42 days. And phase 2 is putting water every day on the tree to make it bigger. So you do the neurocycle again, but it's different. You're doing it for 5 minutes a day, and instead of sort of finding the root problem, and you built the new tree, you're now just stabilizing it. So you are reinforcing what's there. So it's a very quick process to keep it in your conscious mind, and to just expand and practice and grow a little more branches, but it's all in a very uplifting direction. And what's very interesting, Jean-Philippe, is that around day 38 to 42, there's around 38, you get a massive insight. There's this, if you push through, and this insight is like, oh, wow, this is what happened. And if it's maybe a trauma, there could be a lot of grief, because the insight's different. You've got such depth. You can see so much more. And that can throw people off. And if you miss that key thing, you actually go through a dip, and you have to go through that dip. So there's a peak, and then there's another dip, and that dip is there's a whole lot of neurophysiology happening that you have to go through, and then there's literally a climb at the end that last week. And if you miss any of that, and these other stages, I haven't got time to go into all of them, you're not going to create a habit. And so the neurocycle takes you through that entire process for change. So whether you're in business, and I know this is a business podcast, leadership podcast, if you want to change anything in yourself or your team, it's going to take proper cycles.
It takes work. It's fascinating, Caroline. Just a couple of practical suggestions to our listeners. number one, is there a perfect time during the day to do that? Or is it something that we should do at the right moment, meaning the right question, the right issue, the right emotions? What is your practice on this one every day?
I would recommend the morning, because in the morning you have a difference in your cortisol levels and just your focus, and you've had that sleep. And even if you haven't had great sleep, this neurocycle it's amazing how it helps with sleep. It prepares you, because sleep begins in the morning. Preparation for sleep. So that is ideal, but not everyone has the time in the morning.
No.
But you can train yourself. So I do it when I'm getting ready. I do the neurocycle all the time. I'm always in a neurocycle. I dedicate when I'm getting ready. My family knows that that's when you don't talk to me. That's when I'm working through my neurocycle. And I have my phone there to type in because the third step fourth step you're writing. So I spend that time then. And then I use the neurocycle. You can use it in under a minute. You can use it in 30 seconds during the course of the day. So it's a lifestyle. It's because it organizes your mind. It's mind management. So instead of your mind being chaotic, it gets it in order. So that you can do all through the day. If you can't get it done in the morning, find a time that works for you. Maybe lunchtime, but maybe that you have to do it in the evening. So I don't want to be religious about it, but I recommend.
And would you actually pick a quiet place where you have actually silence and you just focus your mind on that exercise, at least in the first 63 days, right? Just to get your habits created. And number two, my other question is, would you recommend our listeners to actually have a journal of their entries day by day when it comes to the statement? At the end of the process, when you basically have this active rage, say, should I actually document that day by day?
Yes, absolutely. So we do that. Yes, you should document it. So get yourself a neurocycle journal. We have some on our website, but you can use any journal. As I said, our new version of currently in our app, you can write on day the fifth step. There's a space for you to type on the fifth step. So you have to record the other stuff in a journal. Our new version of the app that we're working on, you can type everything into the app. It's got everywhere, so you'll be able to journal within the app. We do have a journal download as well in the app as well if people want to use that. But yes, you do need to keep a record and date it. It's so important to date when you start and date each day, because sometimes you might miss a day, because things happen, life happens. And so to track that record, you will, because there's major breakthroughs like day 7, day 4, day 7, day 14, day 21, 42, 6. There's points within the 63 days where amazing breakthroughs happen, and it's great to go back and check that, and also one thought is always connected to other thought. Think of the roots of the trees, even think of clouds, they're connected. So generally one thought will stimulate other areas of our life, and that will give you, so when you finished one cycle, you will be very clear on what you need to do the next one on. So this is not use the neurocycle once, this is a lifestyle we're talking about, because it's basically mind management. And to that point, Jean-Philippe, your brain and body is being changed by your mind every moment of every day for the rest of your life. Whether you like it or not, plasticity is happening in your mind-brain-body connection. So in doing the neurocycle, you train yourself to actually manage your mind so that you drive the direction. Because if someone's saying, I don't have 63 days, I don't have 5 minutes, I don't have 15, my answer to that is, well, your brain, mind, and body are changing anyway.
All the time.
If you don't direct it, 63 days later, you're in more chaos than you were now. So why don't to learn to direct that change? That's what you're giving. It's a tool I'm giving people to direct the changes that are happening in your mind, brain, body. If that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. It's basically being on the driver's seat, right, when it comes to our mind.
Absolutely.
Every day of our life. Now, I'd like to shift gears, Caroline, and talk about the way, in a way, I mean, you use some of that methodology in different discussions when it comes to leadership, when it comes to positive leadership as well. So I'd like to start with the discussion I had with many guests on my podcast, which is the importance for each one of us to understand our own life and developing what is called our own life story. There's a great quote actually from the late American scholar Warren Bennis saying, becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. It is precisely that simple. It is also that difficult. And another guest, Doug, it's a wonderful quote. Another guest, Doug Conant, the former CEO of Campbell Soup, who I spoke to on a podcast, understanding your past experiences, values, beliefs, and how they've shaped you is essential to become an authentic leader. That's what he said. And he used actually that technique that he actually learned from a coach to write down his life story or to tell his life story. And it certainly requires a lot of self-reflection and self-awareness in a big way. So how important is it in your own practice maybe to help your patients or the people you coach to develop their life stories, and maybe using some, of course, of the tools we just went through together?
Oh, absolutely. And you're going to love this because I know you love technology. But basically, I've been using the analogy of the sky and the cloud. Think of how iCloud actually works. You make a backup. So essentially, our autobiography, we record in our mind. We have our whole. Think of the iCloud, how we make a backup. So the sky is not only your mind driving, but your non-conscious also stores this backup. And there is some research, it's very new, showing that it almost is as though the DNA of every cell is the part that's very activated as the mind puts the information and the hedges build and all these trees and things that I've been talking about. The DNA plays a role in almost uploading to the back. The mind makes kind of clicks the button and there's an upload. So your autobiography is it's your history, your autobiography account. It's all over you. It's embodied. So it's essential. And we can get so caught up in fear of missing out and of other people in social media. We know the current problem of our current day. Technology is fantastic, but the implication for our perfect you, for your I factor, it can be very damaging. And so it's very important to come back to that autobiography, your story, your history, to recognize there's something you can do that no one else can do. And that can get very blocked when you're trying to be someone else. And in our current day and age, it does. And, we make a lousy someone else, but we make an amazing you. And part of this whole story, narrative, autobiography is that when we use something like the neurocycle, we develop our ability to self-regulate. When we self-regulate, we really become the decent humans that we have the potential to be, because I can now start regulating, managing my mind, and seeing when I speak like that to someone, it has this kind of negative impact. When I manage my life in this way, not only is it impacting me, but it's impacting others. When I speak to my staff in this way, when I get worried about, when I start comparing myself to someone else, I'm not going to run my team like I should. And so the neurocycle helps you to see the cracks on how you're missing out on your I factor and to celebrate yourself. And it's not selfish. It is the more you recognize your story and what you can do, the more you will seek to support others and the more you will see wisdom in others. You're not going to be threatened by others because you could do something that they can't do. So by lifting them up, you lift yourself up. So autobiography story is so important to keep your perspective and your empathy and all that kind of thing in the right place.
No, love it, Caroline. It reminds me obviously of the so-called the powers of passive leadership, particularly when it comes to oneself, yourself, knowing yourself, self-awareness. And you just talk about self-regulation quickly. And I think you have a wonderful analogy talking about a plane, where you're gonna fly with the plane, the way you're gonna land. Can you walk us through that process to give us, in a way, a great analogy on how to have a handle on the self-management of our mind, self-regulation of our mind every single day of our lives?
Absolutely. Well, we basically our network runs on self-regulation. So mind management is the term I use, but when you're using mind management, you're actually self-regulating. So the analogy is, if you think of flying a plane, the first thing I have to do is they prepare the plane.
Yep.
So there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. So in the neurocycle, you as you go through the neurocycle to develop self-regulation, there's a preparation of the plane before you take off. And that's things like your focus and breathing and meditation, and there's a million different ways you can do that, and that you do just before you gather awareness of the four signals.
The checklist. The plane.
Then you take off. The taking off is equivalent to gathering awareness, and you're flying over this forest. And what is the forest? The forest is your mind, and it's your mind brain body connection. It's everything about you, your autobiography, your experiences, your present, past, and future. You've all stored in these the trees and the hedges and clouds, but flying over a forest is an easy analogy. Now you are the pilot and you the co-pilot, and the pilot is very guided and aided by the co-pilot. So the co-pilot is facilitating the pilot's flying, so that it has to be a team. work. So both perform a vital role, but they've got to work together. And if they don't, it's a problem. So your co-pilot is almost like your wise mind. And because your pilot is in action. So that's your messy mind. And we need a messy mind. It's brilliant. There's nothing wrong with being messy because messy is how we do life. We don't know what's coming up. And so that's the beauty of life. But the co-pilot is able to say, hey, you know what? Maybe that way you spoke to that person, or that way you're functioning now. So it's giving you that wisdom. So you're in this plane or helicopter, whichever you want to see, and you're flying over the forest, and you and as you're having this discussion, you took off because you are maybe driven by hovering anxiety or something there's just things happening at work that are just worrying you. So you know you need to do something. So you prepared, you've taken off, and now the co-pilot and you are having you flying, and it's messy, and your co-pilot saying, hey, you know what, maybe you should just look down below and just shine this, just shine the light down below. Like, imagine there's a spotlight on this helicopter or plane, and can you see that there's a group of trees down there that look pretty toxic, and they're pretty big, and can you see they're kind of generating these 4 signals? And now we start gathering awareness of these 4 wafts of emotions, behaviors, and then you gather awareness, and then the pilot says to you, well, why? Reflect. Why do you think this is happening? Maybe we should land the plane. So you land at step 3. So and then you go up and say, okay, what am I looking at here? Let's take the spade out of the plane. Let's start digging at the roots. Let's start seeing, oh gosh, there's rotten here, and there's this there, and the trees, the branches are how I'm showing up in my communication, my relationships, my behaviors, and the tree trunk is how I'm thinking. The roots are where it's coming from. So this is not who I am when I took off the plane. This is how I've become because of. So in flying over, and so then I land the plane, and then I start digging whatever and reconceptualizing, and then find some roots and put some healing on. So that's the step 4. And now my active reach is, okay, this is great. Tomorrow we'll come back. And today let's just talk about, I'm starting the process. I don't know why this is happening at work, why I'm constantly feeling burnt out, but I've started the process. Take off, fly back, go back to the airport, land the plane. And that's the cycle. Then tomorrow you take off and you do the same thing again. That's an analogy for self-regulation. Now, what's happening a lot, Jean-Philippe, through the current ways that people use meditation and all those things, is we're seeing from the research, we're seeing the feedback, people are pretty good at preparing and taking off. That awareness, the meditation, but then they don't know what to do. They open the doors. They don't know how to fly. They never learned how to fly, so they crash. They crash land, or they just ignore the shining light and they go back to the airport. You don't want to do that, because you don't actually move forward. You won't solve the problem. You're going to band-aid. You're going to put a plaster on the wound as opposed to resolving, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. I love to have a great, beautiful flights and know where to land safely as well, Caroline, for sure. It's a great segue, actually, the analogy you took of the pilot co-pilot. We are entering, obviously, a pretty fascinating era called the AI era, and you mentioned some of your work you're doing, I think, with your own platforms. As you may know, MaxF is actually, we are calling our agent or AI agent co-pilot. It's called co-pilot, and it's really a tool on behalf of the people to help them achieve more, whether it is more productive, more collaborative, more creative, really that right hand, basically. So as a neuroscientist, how do you see the role of this AI kind of co-pilot? And how much could it help us maybe when they accomplish the 5 steps of the neurocycles that we just talked about?
I love that. I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm very excited about AI, and I think I am excited for 2 reasons. Number one, I understand that AI is an algorithm, and just a bit of brain science, if I may, and a bit of psychoneurobiology. AI, as we know, is based on an algorithm. It's based on how a neuron fires. That's the basic underlying principle. But it's based on one neuron. We have 100 billion. We don't even understand how 2 neurons connecting with each other, driven by the mind, what that generates. And we haven't even looked inside the neuron. So if you go inside the neuron, there's another world of energy and microtubules and things that we haven't even touched on. Yeah. So there's no ways that, to put people's minds at ease, there's no ways that AI would take over human function and get sentience and that kind of thing. What we as humans are, we're using our brilliance to make the algorithm more powerful. example. So that's on the one side. I just wanted to say that. So that's why I'm excited about AI, because it helps us to do things more efficiently and quicker. So in our work, we have this Neurocycle app, and we gather data, and I do research, and we have data, and we do qualitative and quantitative studies, and it's hours and hours and hours of manpower and there's potential human error. So this is where we're excited about. We're working actually with IBM at the moment to help us create a tool, and we've gone quite far down the road already, where we're almost at the point of having a dashboard where we are able to then analyze data, obviously identity protected, obviously following HIPAA rules and all that kind of thing. We're able to then take that data and able to get information that can enhance the process for the person of going through the neurocycle, improving. We learn about more about self-regulation, et cetera, that can then be fed back in. In addition, it will help the person within the app to be able to have a user experience, because AI, as we know, can predict, like you using it as a companion. It's looking at what do you need that can make you more efficient. And so we're looking at AI in that aspect too, in terms of how can we make this whole process of helping you. Maybe you need some suggestions for what to reflect on, and maybe you need some suggestions for active reaches and that kind of thing. So that's how we are looking at using it within our tool.
No, exciting. Again, looking forward to use your own AI agents, Caroline, very soon, just to test it and help me actually, and help me as well. Maybe go through this 63 days process we just talked about together. I'd like to talk about positive psychology. I had the pleasure, the honor actually, to host on this podcast authors, researchers such as Kim Cameron, such as Barbara Fredrickson, Martin Seligman as well, who, as you know, have been the founders of positive psychology. So as a neuroscientist, I really love to ask you the question about the way you see the work done by all those famous researchers in positive psychology, and how neuroscience helps or extends the work done by basically those early pioneers of positive psychology.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's fantastic that we shifted from years of looking at just very negative stuff in psychology to actually looking at the power of mindset and expectation. And positive psychology falls within that realm that we know that we know, and I know from my research, that the placebo effect and all these things that people hear about is that the minute that you, for example, let me give you a simple example in terms of neurocycle. If I look at depression as an emotional warning signal and something that will give me information, and that is connected to behaviors and so on, like I described, if I look at it like that, as opposed to looking at it as a symptom of a disease, that means that I've got brain damage and I'm mentally ill, and that's not even good science at all. What we see is an immediate shift in a person's psychoneurobiology, and that enables them to therefore access the wisdom of the unconscious mind. So in simple language, through the power of expectation and looking at things differently, and I'm hesitating to use the word positive totally because we've got to bring balance in, we shift our neurophysiology in a very good way. So it's very important. It's vital research. It's research that we've needed, and people do experience the effect. Where people feel the effect is because they've, without even being aware of it, they've balanced it. If we just think, okay, this is a bad thought, I'm just going to think positive thoughts, it'll fix everything. Like the secret and all those things, that is not good science, and it actually does not work. It'll boomerang, it'll fall flat in its face. So you can't just positive your way through something. What we have to do is part of using positive psychology and expectation the way in what I believe is the correct way is to understand that I show up like this because of a reason, and I've got to go through the healing and the pain, like the surgery example, in order to move forward. So I can't just take this pain and slap on a band-aid and think, okay, that's it. I can't just do that. And that we see creates more damage, more brain damage, etc., more mind, brain, body, more mental health issues and so on. So it's using it with a balance. So positive psychology, I almost would say, is the expectation mindset that you go into the neurocycle with, and then the sort of the techniques and the things that fall under positive psychology are great in step 5. So in the active reach.
Got you. So basically you kind of learn how to set the right expectation for your life with positive psychology. And then you go to the gym of the 5-step neurocycles and you actually make it happen. Is that kind of right summary?
That's kind of right. That's yes. Because yes. So instead of just jumping from,
Yeah.
oh, this is a problem, I'm going to think positively. We
Yeah.
skipped out a whole point. It's like you can't fly. If you don't know how to fly the plane and land the plane, you'll crash. So we can't just go and say, I'm going to skip all of the flying and I'm just going to land the plane. You had to take off before you could land the plane. So just using positive psychology on its own is just literally landing the plane. You have to, you didn't take off anyway. So it's not going to have the. So when it works, you've actually done you've got to do the full cycle.
Full cycle. Now, I'd like to, the time is going very fast, Caroline. I'd like to talk about your own practice because I understand that even at home you have a designated space to exercise it, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, you even experience that with your kids actually at home. So, and you do that both with your kids and with others' kids, but also all the way up to business leaders. So I'd love to talk about the way you've been practicing that maybe with leaders of large organizations. If you could share a story, of course, respecting privacy, we don't need any names, where you've been able to change dramatically, to transform a leader mindset for the better with some very positive results because, again, of that tool set, practice, and the way you have him or her changing the way they do that every day in their lives.
Absolutely. Well, in South Africa, I did a lot of work with, there's so many stories I can tell, but what popped in my mind was an interesting one was the Atomic Energy Corporation. I worked with them they're massive in South Africa back in the mid-90s. And I worked with all the top executives that are all the scientists. So there's a very specific mindset, very siloed thinking, very much, the leadership, the interactions, not the greatest because it's, you're dealing with people that are very focusing on their field. Yeah. And so using this practice of helping people to actually self-regulate themselves through the neurocycle, then be able to help them to tune into each other. So transform the ability of scientists to take the incredible skills that they had as individuals and bring those to the table to solve problems in a more effective way. Because instead of working like in separate kind of categories, they worked as an interaction. So it's almost like you made little holes in the wall and then they could interact. And if that makes sense, I'm trying to think of analogies to help people. So that was transformational, but it starts with people understanding themselves. It starts with I've got to self-regulate myself, because very often, like there was another thing that's just popping in my head of another company, that very big successful company, and there were two main leaders that were always in conflict. So every meeting was a drama because these two and honestly, when I sat in one of these meetings, okay, let me just observe and see what's going on, and I started actually mapping this whole thing out, doing the neurocycle, but I did it while they were communicating, and then I created this whole metacarp on the table, and I took them through the process, said, okay, look at this, you're both saying the same thing. You said in essence, they were saying the same thing, but they weren't listening to each other. And I just walked them through that process, helped them to use the neurocycle to understand how they was managing themselves and how that was influencing their perception and vice versa, and then got them to actually, because I could show them visually what they had experienced, and suddenly I didn't know you were saying that. So there was a connection there, and they were two vital key players in the organization, and they always were in conflict, which was slowing progress down. And anyway, at the end of that, honestly 2 hours they walked out best friends, and it transformed the relationship, because they both were so vital to the organization. So those are just two examples off the top of my head. I honestly can tell you that using the neurocycle, and it's the word, neurocycle is just a great word, but it's managing your mind. And it's scientific process, and it's easy to use, and that's what people, it's nice to have a concept that is a system. It's not a technique, it's a system. Using it as a life skill. I don't work directly with people anymore. I don't practice anymore because I don't have time, but I still do the research, and I reach people now through my platform and books and so on. And as a life tool to manage your mind, like in your relationships, with my kids. My kids were taught this from young. My youngest patients were 2 years of age. I've even brought out books just last year on how to help your child clean up their mental mess. It's a vital life skill to help us become decent humans. And when we're decent humans and we're managing ourselves, that's when we contribute to our fields and to, change the evils like apartheid that we see in this world. So I know that's philosophical, but there really is a very big objective behind managing our minds.
It's certainly very worth trying it and doing it every day, Carl. And so we are coming to an end. I'd like to go back to basically the core foundation of this podcast, which is positive leadership. This is the way it's called. This is also a school of thought. You know, I had the opportunity to discuss with more than 70 guests today and to learn about their deep beliefs, their passion, and also their unique ways to show up as positive leaders. So what is your own definition of what you would call, Caroline, a positive leader? And how can you recognize them in your personal, social, or professional life?
I love that question, and my answer is probably predictable, and that is a person who can self-regulate. A person who can self-regulate and who's managing their mind is able to tune in to the people that they're leading, and most importantly, tune into themselves and understand the impact of what they can bring to the table, have confidence in that, and then at the same time being able to recognize that in the people that they work with. So self-regulation opens doors that are unbelievable in leadership.
That's the key. So my very final question, Caroline, has been a fascinating discussion. I'd love to ask you, what is your own purpose and how do you maintain your incredible drive energy? Because I could feel your energy across the oceans coming to me in Paris. Not just the beautiful green colors, but all of your positive energy. So what is your own purpose? What is underlying that force that you are driving every single day?
I get the force that drives it is the concern that I have with looking at the humanity in general on a more broad sense. If you just look at bad things have always happened and it's always going to happen. But when we see enabling a person to self-regulate and understand themselves, it changes how they function as a human. So becoming decent humans is a big objective, because I know that then that changes the world in a big way. And then in an individual way, I am very concerned. Individual way is coming down a little smaller. I'm very concerned about the mental health movement. I've been in the field for nearly 40 years, and I've watched it in the last 40 years transform into, instead of looking at the person in their whole story and their context, it's become one of a biomedical model of just labeling and diagnosing and taking people's stories out the picture. And we've really discussed the importance of stories. So, and that's it's affecting children. It's shortening lifespans. I mean, some of the statistics are horrific. People are dying 8 to 25 years younger than they've ever done from preventable lifestyle diseases. So the way we've defined and managed mental health has really created a huge problem. So it's a big part of the work I do is to try and free people and help them feel empowered to be able to understand themselves and not to get caught up in labels and things that limit you.
Well, thank you so much, Caroline. It's been such a pleasure to have you helping us clean up our mental mess by flying in this wonderful journey, seeing the skies, the clouds, and having as well a safe landing altogether. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I enjoy a lot of our dialogue today, Caroline.